Begin the current Daf and set this Eruvin Daf Ayin Beis. We begin on the bottom of Ayin Aleph and Beis. 3 lines up at the bottom of the Eruvin. We're in the middle of a discussion for the previous Daf. It's interesting how we got to this point. The previous Mishnah had a machlekes regarding a shiur from the voice. If one person was already in a partnership with some of his neighbors, they had a barrel of wine, they had a barrel, so we had a machlekes regarding what were they partners in, if it's going to work or not. Depending, one mandama says it doesn't make a difference what they're partners in, it's always going to work. One said if it's partners all with wine, it's going to work, but if one with wine, one oil, it's not going to work. And then the Gemara brought a third opinion, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, who he said that, no, echad zeh ve'echad zeh, no, it doesn't make a difference if he's partners with both with wine, it's not going to work. So the Gemara wondered why. If he's partners all with wine, why it won't work? So the first shot in the Gemara said it's not going to work because they bought it in a partnership. So therefore we say ain't braver. No one really had verified what's his wine. The second interpretation, which is really where our Gemara continues off of that, Rabbi Yosef said, of course it's going to work for shituf mavais. The question is that going to also work for the Eruvin chatzeres? Are we samchin al shituf b'makom eruv? And that was the machlekes regarding the wine that used for shituf mavais. Rabbi Shloimy today says it's not going to work for Eruvin chatzeres. And on that, Rabbi Yosef proved that. You know how I know I'm right, that that's the interpretation of Rabbi Shloimy today? Because Rav rules like Rabbi Shloimy today. He also rules like Rabbi Meir. What's the reason of Rabbi Meir in his machlekes with Rabbanon, which the Gemara had brought the Brisa, which we're going to bring today's daf also, that you have to make a Eruvin chatzeres and shituf mavais, or is it enough to make just either one of the two, like the Chum say? Rav rules like Rabbi Meir that you have to make both. From the fact that he says like both Rabbi Shloimy today and Rabbi Meir, obviously it's the same halacha, but you're not samech on shituf b'makom eruv. So the Gemara says, wait a second, to the contrary, it's all the same reason, and why do you have to do like both? We have to tell you because two chedushim you could not say according to one opinion, and you have to say that you cannot rely on the shituf mavais when it's wine, which that's a chiddush because a Eruvin chatzeres has to be with bread, and not only that, but we even rule like Rabbi Meir, and that's Rabbi Shloimy today because his halacha was zebayayin to zebayayin, and we're talking about shituf mavais with wine. You don't rely on that for the Eruvin chatzeres for bread, and not only that, but even if you make the shituf mavais out of bread, you're not going to rely on that in the Eruvin chatzeres. That was where our Gemara left off. And we're actually going to explain that interpretation is a machlekes hamaram in the machlekes tanoim of Rabbi Meir and Rabbanon regarding if you're samech on shituf b'makom eruv or not, what the parameters of that halacha is. Shis corresponds because of Necheskel trending that Chaim. Pishna was joining us for today's daf. Today we're going to discuss regarding machlekes whether one eruv can be used both for an Eruvin chatzeres and shituf mavais, like we just explained. Then we continue with the next Mishnah, which discusses when you have multiple groups living in the same building. Do they all need to join the Eruv separately, or can they join the Eruv as a single unit? Then we discuss the halacha in the Mishnah that says people who sleep in one house, but they eat in another house, are they considered to live in the house they sleep in, or in the house that they eat in? What's considered their primary residence regarding the laws of the Eruv? Some of the key terms and concepts are which is that when we have to rule, we're going to rule we're going to tell you a chiddush in that of the interpretation that permits it, because that's a big chiddush to be machmer. It's always very easy to be stringent. You never go wrong that way. But the kaich is adif in the ruling, and makom lina gayrim regarding that the way a person sleeps, that causes for the person's primary residence. So we begin the current daf Ayin Aleph on the base. Like we said, we had this halacha that Eruvin chatzeres has to be with bread. Shituf mavais can be with wine or bread. And we had the machlekes Rabbi Meir and Rabbanon. Rabbi Meir says you have to do, this was the last thing we learned in the previous stuff, he says you have to make Eruvin chatzeres and shituf mavais. It's not enough to do just shituf mavais because then the children might forget the laws of Eruvin chatzeres. Some said no, you could do either one or the other, you could do either Eruvin chatzeres or shituf mavais. So that's why Gemara begins, it says Polygamor of Nechumi v'Rabba, or machlekes amiram, in this machlekes chanoi. Chadama one says bipas, regarding if you make the Eruv, the shituf mavais with bread. Again, the Eruvin chatzeres is this. If you look at concentric circles, the bias they have everyone's house is open up into the courtyard, and then the courtyards open up into the mavais. The alleyways and those open up into the shutzarab. So if you made a larger, more extensive shituf mavais with bread, says one of the opinions, the Kuli Amalei Pligi, no one's going to disagree, the Bechad Sagi, that with one thing is enough, meaning you don't have to make another Eruv. It's enough with the shituf mavais, because bread works both by shituf mavais and Eruvin chatzeres. According to both opinions, we're going to rely on the shituf b'makom eruv because you made it with bread anyway, and that's the same thing we would use for Eruvin chatzeres. Ki pliki b'yayin. One of these two ma'amarim, we don't know who said what, from the Chumi or Rabbah. When did we have the machlekes regarding when you make the shituf mavais with wine? According to a mayor, you're not going to rely on it for the Eruvin chatzeres because you cannot make a Eruvin chatzeres with wine. So therefore, it's not. How could you use the shita mavois of wine for the Rubik Hatzeris, which has to be with bread? But the Rabbanan hold that it's going to be permitted. Now, so the question, as Rashi explains to the Rabbanan, is what do you mean? But wine is not. It doesn't work for the Rubik Hatzeris. How could the shita mavois of wine work for the Rubik Hatzeris? So now Rashi explains the lumdis, the smara of the Rabbanan. Migui, since it works for itself for the shita, so it's more extensive that it allows even a larger area. So it's going to work also for the chatzeris that we're going to rely on the shituf b'mokim and we also so we rely on the shituf for the area itself. And as Rashi explains, both opinions hold that we rely on the mavoi you rely on the Eruvin chatzeris for the mavoi because the Eruvin chatzeris has to be made out of bread. So if you make a Eruvin chatzeris, that's going to work also for the shita mavoi. So let's say they all make with the they make the Eruvin chatzeris with bread. You can rely on the shita mavoi that for the Eruvin chatzeris because it's made out of bread. The whole machlekes is regarding relying on the Eruvin chatzeris on the shita mavoi. Shita mavoi is made out of wine. How could you rely on that? That's the machlekes. But if it's made out of bread, of course it's going to work. Why? If anything, it's better. It's covering a more extensive area. That's one interpretation of machlekes.
The voice has to be in the chutz and the chatzeris has to be in the house, no?
Yeah, so the shita mavoi is in the chatzir and the Eruvin chatzeris is in the house.
It's not going to be so how do you have one for both?
No, in the chanami, it's not. It's not in the Eruvin chatzeris. It's a shita mavoi. Good question. But once it's more extensive, if you're doing something that's a mechlar masai mon almost like that idea, if you're making a shita mavoi, all the mavoi are joined together. So that's for sure including the Eruvin chatzeris. That would be that svara of that manda. So that's one interpretation. As continue to talk the other one says that the yayin, the kuliyam alei pligi, to be in entirety. When it comes to wine, no one's going to disagree that you need to have both. Meaning, even the Rabbanan would agree that we cannot rely on the chatzeris, on the shita and mavais, because you don't say a migui, because that's wine. This needs bread. Ki pligi bepas. The machlekes was regarding bread, and the machlekes is both regarding the shituf and the eir. Contrary to you don't rely on one, even though it's the same bread, but they're independent, as we said in the previous stuff. We don't want the children to forget the Rubik Hatzeris. So even if the sheet of Mavais was with bread, it doesn't make a difference. That's not going to be effective for the Rubik Hatzeris. So again, that was two different interpretations regarding what is the machlekes remain Rabbanan, if it is regarding bread or if it's regarding wine. Now, Meisvei, the Gemara asked from the Bryce we quoted the previous stuff. Said when Remeir said his opinion, you need both. It said the Machamer the say just say no oima arvin oima shtat. No, either one or the other, either Reb Chatzeris or Shetum Mavais. Says the Gemara, my love, isn't it talking about oima arvin b'chatz b'pas? Either you do Reb Chatzeris with bread in the courtyard, oima shtat from b'mav b'yayin, or you're doing Shetum from Mavais with wine because Shetum from Mavais works even with wine. And it's difficult according to the one who says that they don't disagree by wine, that everyone agrees that by wine you need to have both the Rubik Chatzeris and the Shtum Mavais. Seemingly over here it sounds like the Chamal that no, it would be sufficient with, like the first Mandama said, the Shtum Mavais, since it's going to work, even though it's wine, but Miga works for the Shtum Mavais, it's going to work for the Rubik Chatzeris. I remember Gidl Rabbi says, no, it's not true. And this is what the Bryce is saying. Either you make a Rubik Chatzeris with bread, and then a B'toran Kan, then it's permitted both in the Chatzar and in the Mavai. Or you make Shetum Mavais with bread, because that case of Shetum Mavais is similar to the Rubik Chatzeris, and then the B'toran Kan, then it's permitted both in the Chatzar and in the Mavai. But the truth is, if you would make it with wine, then it wouldn't work, and therefore it's not difficult on that mandal. Now that ends that Gemara's discussion. That the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Huda Amar Rav, Halacha K'rei Meir. The halacha is like a meir that you don't rely on one or the other. You have to make both. You have to make Shetum from Mavais and the Rubik Chatzeris. And we had two interpretations on what he was talking about. Was he talking about regarding wine, or was he talking about regarding bread? But regarding that, the halacha is like a meir, that's one version of saying it. The halacha is like a meir. Rav Huna says, no, minik meir, the custom is like a meir. And the third version of Rabbi Shloimy says, nagu ha'am meir. The people have accustomed themselves to do like a meir. Now, these three different terminologies of halacha, minik, and nagu, the Gemara in the last parak in Tainis Daf Chavav Mebez explains, halacha is that you darshan, you lecture this in the shiur to say that this is what people should do. Minig is you don't lecture it, but if someone comes to ask you, you tell him that that's what you should do. And nagu is that you don't even teach that, but if someone did that, then you don't protest the person that had done that. Now we continue with the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing these things of Eruvin Chatzeris. So the Mishnah describes the following case: Chamisha Chaburas. It was 5 groups. Sheshavsu b'trakon echad. That was spending Shabbos in one big house, one mansion for Shabbos, and they split up into 5 different areas, and each area has an opening from that mansion into the courtyard, and each one has to go ahead and make an Eruv together. The people in this house have to join together. It's with a chutzner. There's many different houses in Orlando, wherever we went, with everyone's the 5 different groups of families in one house, and there's a whole development, and it all opens up into the same area. So now we have to make a Eruv Chatzeres. So Beishami say, Eruv l'chol chabur b'chabur. You have to make an Eruv. Every single group in that house has to make their own Eruv. The reason that is because they have separate areas, and every single group has to give bread for the Eruv in the Chatzar, as if there were 5 different houses. Now, as Rashi points out, the same thing would be if, let's say, that the people in this room, this one family, the A family, wants to carry to the B family in the same mansion, they would also have to make an Eruv between them too, because they're considered as different bottom. Although it's one house, one mansion, but they have separate openings into Rosh Hashanah, and they're considered separate areas. So, yeah, the Mishnah is talking about they have to join in the area, but also even if they would want to go besides to the Chatzar, to another room in that mansion, they would also have to make an Eruv Chatzeres. That's Beis Shammai's opinion. They say no. This separation between the houses, in the house itself, between the rooms, are not considered a separate domain, because as we'll learn in the Gemara, it's a very low down wall. It's not your regular walls. So therefore, it says Beisil Eruv Echel Kulan. Sufficient from this whole house of the 5 different groups to take one Eruv from them all. And so too says Rashi in the mansion itself. They could carry from one room to the other, from one group to the other without an Eruv, because the fact that it's in one big house, it connects the 2 of them. Now, since between them you don't have to make an Eruv, so it's like as if the halacha of when you have one person being a shliach, and we'll discuss this later on too, regarding when you have 5 people that are in, they collected their Eruv. The halacha is when you have 5 people in a courtyard and they made an Eruv between all 5 of them, so they could say that's one. And if let's say they're coming to make an Eruv with another chutzner, so the halacha is that it's sufficient that one of them should take the Eruv for the rest of them. That's what he said, that if they each collected their own Eruv first and then they want to merge with the adjoining chutzner, so then they could go ahead and bring their already collected Eruv to the other chutzner. That's the halacha that essentially Rashi is describing is over here by the halacha of when you have the 5 people in the one house. It's like they collected in their chutzner already and they're taking it to another chutzner. So the halacha is that only one person has to go ahead and give the Eruv to join in the other house, the other mansions here in this development, because they're all considered as one itself, right? So that's Machlekes Beis Shammai Beisil. Now it says the Mishnah Moedim, Beisil agrees. If some of the rooms if some of the people in this mansion are living in rooms or in upper stories, that then it's like considered like 5 different houses, and it's not like 5 people already collected their Eruv because they did not make an Eruv between themselves. Then each and every group has to go ahead and give their separate Eruv. They're not considered as one. And we'll explain to Gemara what's this case of rooms or upper stories, but again, it's not flimsy walls, as the Gemara is going to explain right now. Amar of Nachman. He says, this whole machlek is in our Mishnah. If the separate rooms are considered independent areas, like as if it's own house, is b'mesipis. It's talking about a small, shallow wall of pieces of wood. Well, that's what according to Beisil, it's considered as one house, and it's like 5 people already collected their Eruv. Where here also, it's like they already made their Eruv because it's not really separations. It's like that little wall that you have sometimes, just a separation. That's what we're talking about. Right, if you have walls that are 10 tefachim high, says Rav Nachman everyone would agree, even according to Beisil, of course, you would have to, every single group in that mansion would have to give a separate Eruv because they're considered separate areas. They have their own opening into Rosh Hashanah. That's one version of Nachman. Ikadam doesn't say a second version of Nachman. Number of Nachman says no. After Masibas Machlekes, no, that also by Masibas Machlekes, which obviously what that infers is that not only when the Mechit says Asar Tzvachim that we have Machlekes Beis Shammai Beisil, but even by Masibas. And the chiddush in that is that don't say that Beis Shammai would only hold that it's only when you have mechitza of 10 tefachim, that's when we're going to say it's going to be forbidden. But by mesipus, he would agree that it's not a chatzitza and it's going to be more like one house. No, even by mesipus, they say it's also, but the machlekes is also by mechitza asar. Beisil holds, even when the mechitza is 10 tefachim, according to the second version of Nachman, it's going to be considered as one house, and as if they all join together, and they would only have to give one piece of bread for the Erev. Bisham holds no. Not only by Mechitza Asara is going to be considered as distinct, but even by Mesibas, Bisham would hold, according to this version, that it's both that they can have the Machlekes. Now, continuing the Gemara, there's other opinions. Pligi ba, on regarding to the halacha of a Mishnah, Rabbi Machlekes Rabbi Chia Rabbi Shimon Berebi. Chanama one says a third opinion. Machlekes Beisham Beisil is b'mechitzas hamegis l'tikra. The whole machlekes is only if the walls reach the ceiling. A mechitzah she'im megis l'tikra, but if they're walls that don't reach the ceiling, even if they're 10 tefachim high, according to everyone, it would be sufficient to have one air for them all. And I think I once heard there's some hotels that have that actually. The walls don't even go up to the ceiling. It's like you could hear the rooms are open. If it's like that, then obviously he holds that one air would be sufficient. So the machlekes is this interpretation disagrees with both of the versions of Rav Nachman. Because according to the first version of Rav Nachman, when it's a wall that's 10 tefachim high, even according to Beis Hillel, they would agree that it's considered distinct rooms, and you would have to make an air for each one. Here we said that no, even if it reaches the ceiling, Beis Hillel disagree. Even B'Megis L'Tikra is where the machlekes is. The Beis Hillel would hold that no, it's considered as one house. And according to the second version of Rav Nachman said that the machlekes is even when they have these mesipis, these small narrow walls, that Beishamai still says going to be aser, and you're going to have to take a separate air from them all. And here we say that no, even if the mechitza 10 tefachim high, it's not going to be aser, only if the walls reach the roof, only if it reaches the ceiling. So either one of this interpretation, whichever one, we don't know which Tana said what, but either one, it's not going to be like the two interpretations of Rav Nachman. Now, then the fourth one, the second of these two different opinions, the other one says, Machlekes is the opposite. Machlekes is b'mechitza shemegis l'tikra. The machlekes is if the walls don't reach the ceiling, then there's a machlekes. Okay, they don't reach the ceiling. Is that considered separation or it's not separation? Mechitza megis l'tikra. But if it reaches the ceiling, the very color one's going to give them according to Beis Hillel. You have to make it air for every single group. That's a regular wall separating the rooms, and they all have their own opening into Rosh Hashanah. That would make it into a separate area into the chutzah. That each one has to make their own air. That's four different interpretations in the machlekes b'sham esal. Now, as we continue to Beis Meisvei, the Gemara asked from the following brayso. Rabbi Yehuda Saber. Rabbi Yehuda the thinker, because of his intellect, he was called Rabbi Yehuda the thinker. He says like this. He says, we don't have a machlekes b'sham esal amachitzas amagis l'tikra regarding if you have walls that reach the ceiling. No one's going to disagree, says Rabbi Yehuda Saber. You have to make it every single group. It's regular walls that go up, and we're separate. And we all have separate entries into the chutzah. What's the machlekes? If the walls don't reach the ceiling, Beishamai say still, even though the walls they're still nice walls, they're high walls. Beishamai say you have to make it every single group. The Beis Hillel say no, it's sufficient to have one air still. Since the walls don't make it to the top, it's enough. We're all considered as one, and it's enough to make one air for them all. So now the Gemara asks from this Rabbi Yehuda Saber on all four opinions to see how it matches up. Lamanda Amar, according to the one who says b'mechitzas hamegis l'tikra machlekes, according to the third interpretation that said that we're talking about that the machlekes is regarding when the walls reach the ceiling. That's the machlekes tiyufta, your refutation, because we see clearly over here the Beis Hillel agrees that it's going to be aser when the walls reach the ceiling, and he said everyone agrees that it's going to be aser. And that third interpretation that says that no, that's where the machlekes is. So that's a refutation in the brayso. Ulamandam, according to the other one who says that the mechita she'emagis l'tikra machlekes is what we call the fourth interpretation that says the machlekes is regarding when the walls don't reach the ceiling. Siyata says being supported from this Rabbi Yehuda Saber. That's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Saber said. It says if the walls don't reach, that's machlekes. If it reaches, everyone agrees that it would be considered independent. Now, lahach lishn domer Rav Nachman, according to the first version of Rav Nachman, that he said machlekes b'mesipes. The machlekes was regarding when you have these shallow walls. But when you have, let's say, mechitzas of 10 tefachim high, Beis Hillel would agree that it's going to be independent rooms, independent areas. Tiyufta, he's refuted from this brayso because explicitly the brayso tells us that when you have walls, as long as it doesn't reach the ceiling, it is permitted. It is considered like one area. But according to Rav Nachman, he said no. Beis Hillel would agree by mechitzas asar that it would be considered independent, not like one area. But the question is, lahach lishna. But according to the lishna bas, according to the second version, Domer of Nachman said, af b'masibas machlokes, that the machlokes b'sham is also by mechitzas, but also the mesipas limitav to yufta. This second interpretation is what we're wondering. Is it a refutation? Why? Because we learn here by Rida Saber that the machlekes is by mechitzas, by walls. We said if it doesn't reach, then we have the machlekes. But it sounds like by the mesipis that everyone would agree that's going to be mutter, because it's not mechitzas, it's mesipis, it's these flimsy, shallow walls. That Bishama would agree that it would be considered as one area, not as separate areas. But does that refute the second interpretation of Nachman that he said that no, Bishami disagrees even by not only by mechitzas but even by mesipis, and he holds that they're considered separate areas. But here it's Rabbi Shloimy saying that it's not separate areas. Not a Mechaber Nachman. The second interpretation of Nachman would tell you that no, Pligim mechitza, you're right. Like Rabbi Saber is saying they disagree regarding walls, and but what the mesipis, same thing would be even by the mesipis that Bishami would hold that it would be considered separate areas. Then why, as we're learning about Yehuda Saber, so why is the dispute mentioned regarding walls that don't reach the ceiling? What do you mean? Say it even by Mesipus? Oh, like the Yachar Kirchen, the Basil, because we wanted to tell you this trend to Basil, who says it's going to be permitted even by Mechitzas, as long as it's not Magis Latikr. Ask the Gemara, but why don't you say Machlekes regarding these flimsy walls? Well, the Yachar Kirchen, the strength of Bisham, that even by Mesipus, that are basic, not even walls barely, that still Bisham will hold that they're considered separating the areas and you have to make an air from each one independently. That says the Gemara, no, we better have the strength of an opinion that's permitting something than that was forbidding, because permitting is definitely a more strength of character, because that's telling you something that maybe you wouldn't know. Machmer doesn't really tell us, and therefore that's what he said. But really, Bishamai, it's not. This interpretation of Nachman is not refuted from Yehuda Saber, because it could be Bishamai disagrees not only by Mechitza but even by Mesibas. Now the Gemara concludes on Rav Nachman and Rav Halacha Yehuda Saber. Halacha is like this Yehuda Saber, that when the walls reach the ceiling, that Beisil would agree that it's going to be awesome. And Rav Nachman Yitzchak says Masnit Namitek. He says, and the precise reading of our Mishnah indicates this interpretation, because they tell me what we learned in the Mishnah. It said, after we said the Machlekes B'Sham Mesil, we said Mesil agrees, Bisman Shemektsas and Shurim Bechadam Baliyas, when some of the people in the mansion are living in rooms or in the upper stories, in the VIP room upstairs, that then you need to make a separate area from every single group. Now, explains the Gemara. What are the rooms and what are the upper stories? If rooms means literally chadar mamash, literally rooms, meaning that were never attached. That's what a room is. A room is its own area. V'aliyas and upper stories, aliyas mamash means the upper stories, which is like a separate loft. So pshita, obviously, it's a totally separate area. It's not like this one big open, hostel or whatever, this and that. It's separate areas. Of course, it would be separate. Elalav, rather, obviously, what the Mishnah means to say, ke'ein chadar, u'ke'ein aliyah, something that's similar to rooms, is similar to the upper stories. What is that? Machitzas and agis latikra. Although it was one big room, but when you make these walls, you roll in those big mechitzas that go all the way up to the ceiling, although really it was one big room, and maybe you could say that it would be considered one big room. We're saying that nobody would agree that since the walls go up to the ceiling, it's going to be separate. No, obviously you see from there, like if you do that saber, that Basil agree when it's mechitzas and magis latikra, then it would be considered as separate areas. That's what the Mishnah is saying, that Basil agrees by chadar baliyas. Doesn't mean literally chadar baliyas, because of course we wouldn't have to say that. It means ke'ein chadar or ke'ein aliyas, which is when, even though really it was one room, it wasn't separate room, but you brought in these mechitzas, these partitions that go up to the ceiling, that's what, like you see from our Mishnah, like read that Sab, and even Allah Chafaz like him, that Basil would agree there's going to be separate rooms when the mechitzas reach the ceiling. Now, Tana, we're not finished yet. The Gemara brings another issue about this Machlekes B'Sham Basil. Tana, and there's two versions of this interpretation. Tana, we learned in Braisa, when did we say that B'Shamai would say it's going to be Aser, meaning that each room has to go and give their own Eruv? Is when they bring their Eruv to another place, meaning the people here in this mansion, they're joining in the larger development, but you put the Eruv in one of the houses, they're taking and they're bringing it to one of the other houses. They're agreeing to host the Eruv in their house. That's where B'Shamai said, okay, every single room in this mansion's got to give the bread to the Eruv Chatzers. But if the Eruv was coming, that it was being hosted here in this mansion, everyone from the Chatzar is bringing the bread to this Traklin. then everyone would agree, even Beishamai, that Erev Echad Kulam, that one Erev for all the members of this Chakam would be sufficient. As Rashi explains, this Tana that's differentiating between if the Erev is somewhere else or if it comes to them, he holds that the reasoning of Beisham Beisil is not a machlokes in the mechitzis element, as we were explaining up until now. Rather, even according to Beishamai, the mansion connects them. And they don't have to make an Erev between themselves. There are like 5 people that joined in the Erev. Rather, what they hold is that when you have 5 people that join in a chutzner and they're coming to make the Erev another chutzner, if they're coming to bring their Erev over there, Beishan hold in general, one person cannot be a shlich for them all. Rather, they have to go ahead and each bring their own piece of bread. That's why Beishan would hold that each one would have to bring their own bread. But if the Erev is coming to their house, then they're all equal over there. That's the same thing as the Trochlin. Since it's one domain, it's comparable to when it's coming to them. Because as Rashi points out, if Beishama would hold that really in the mansion they're considered separate Rishuyas, as we're explaining up until now, and they didn't make an Erev amongst themselves, so then even if the Erev is coming to them, then why would that help? Why would they only be as one? You would have to still make Chamisha Sha'ar, you would still have to go ahead and join, everyone would have to give their bread. Obviously, Rashi says, it's like he's explaining that they're not disagreeing regarding if they're one. They're all one. Question is, even when they're one, what the halach is, like we said, when you have 2 chatzeres, a Pesach and you're joining into another chatzer, that's where Beis Shammai would hold that no, El resident still must contribute, and therefore that's the same thing over here in this case itself. And Beis Hillel would hold that no, that they bring their already collected aid to the other chatzer, and therefore they only have to give one. Now, based on this, says the Gemara, Kaman Azla the Tanya. So who does it go like the following brisa? Chamisha should go with Eruvin. If you have 5 people that collected the Eruvin, they all live in the same courtyard, and they already made an Eruvin Chatzeris. These 5 members, Kishmalichin is Eruvin L'Makamach, when they're taking the Eruvin Chatzeris to another place, Erev Echel Kulan, it's sufficient to take one Erev, take one of the breads to the other Chatzer. Come on, who's that like? That's Beis Hillel, as we just explained. Beis Hillel is the one that says that they're already joined as one by their own Erev, then it's enough to take their already collected bread to the other Chatzar. That's what you said. Bisham would hold that no, each one would have to go ahead and bring their own bread to the other Chatzar. And that's the same thing here in the Trochlin, and that's one interpretation. However, it says, that those say a second version, which is the opposite. But remember when we said this Machlekes Bisham and Beis Hillel in our Mishnah that each room has to join their own separate bread, or it's one for them all, is Kishaya Erev Ba'atzlan. This version says the opposite. The Machlekes was when the Erev came to them. And that's the Machlekes that Beis Shammai holds, and even though it's considered as one Rishus, and it's comparable to 5 people that made the Erev by themselves, and the Erev is coming to them, even so, they all have to go ahead and join in the Erev, because in relation to the other people, even though it's coming to them, still Beis Shammai holds, we're still considered as separate entities. Beis Hillel holds that no, since the Erev is coming to them, then they don't have to go ahead and give a separate piece of bread. According to this version, if they're taking the Erev to a different house in the courtyard, everyone, even Beis Hillel would agree. You have to make a separate Erev. Every separate chabura, every separate group would have to give their own bread for the Erev. So based on this, as the Gemara, it's a command all the time. Then who's the brayso that we mentioned before going like, which we said Chamisha should go by Eruvin if you have 5 people like near Erev. We say Kishmalichin is Rubin Lamakam Acher, they're taking Erev to another place. Erev Echel Kula, it's enough to make one Erev for them all. So commandos are like, so the Gemara do like Echad. It's not like any one of them, because according to this version, we said everyone agrees. If you're taking it to another place, even if we're all one, you have to go ahead and give a separate bread for every single person has to bring theirs to the other chatzar. And therefore, based on that, the Bryce is not like Beis Shammai, nor like Beis Hillel. Continue the halacha of the next Mishnah. Continue on these halachas of Rubi Chatzeres. The Mishnah says, in a similar theme that we just mentioned before, you have the brothers that are eating on their father's table. There are still some people over here that still have the kindle come and the espentate, eskest. So they're eating on their father's table. They look like their own balabatim. They sleep in their own houses. But them and their fathers and the brothers, they all live in the same courtyard in the same area. So that says the Mishnah, so if they want to join in the Eruv with the other people in the courtyard, every single one of them has to give a separate piece of bread to the Eruv, as the Gemara is going to explain the reason for this. Now, therefore, says the Mishnah, if one of the brothers forgot to join in the Eruv, he has to go ahead and nullify his right because he is considered a separate entity over here in the Eruv Chatzeres. Now, says the Mishnah, but Amos said, when did we say this? And this we just said before. This if they're taking the Eruv to another place, meaning they're putting it to one of the other houses of the other members of the courtyard. Since there is a requirement of an Eruv, so we say in the Gemara that since the other members of the courtyard are making it forbidden, so they're also going to make it forbidden. And therefore they also have to give a piece of bread because they're considered separate from the fact that they sleep in their own houses, and also even where they eat, as we're going to see in the Gemara, they also eat in their own houses. Because they do takeout from their parents. They don't even eat by their father. They don't give them the nachas of sitting down at the kitchen table with the mama, says, oh, what do you have? What do you have? And they come and they take out. But, so therefore, when do we say in the halacha of the Mishnah, if they're taking the Eruv to one of the other houses? But if the Eruv of the whole courtyard with Boaz Slon was coming to the patriarch's house, then you don't have to go ahead and create an Eruv, as the Gemara said in the Memtes and Aleph. The house where the Eruv is doesn't have to give a piece of bread, and all the children are offshoots of this father's house. Or let's say another similar case, or let's say there's actually no one else living b'chatzer in that courtyard to make an obligation of an Eruv, because it's only the father on this whole estate with his kids living in all these other houses in this one courtyard. Then in the tzrichel Arav, then you don't even have to make an Eruv b'chatzis, because it's all considered like one yachid, because the father, he's the centrifuge of this whole estate over here, and they're all asked from the tata, we would come and everything's by him. So therefore, since there's no one else over there, those are two cases that you wouldn't even have to go ahead and make an Eruv. Now, one thing the Gemara wants to say from our Gemara, from our Mishnah, Shema Minah, that obviously Makam Lina Gar. Obviously, with the causation, as we're going to mention as we're going to end off this daf, there's a machlekes, as we'll see. What creates your residence for the halacha of Eruvin Chatzeres seems like where you sleep, because it sounds like from the Mishnah that if these children would sleep in their father's house, even if they would take their Eruv somewhere else, meaning it wouldn't be in their father's house, they would not have to join in the Eruv. Only the father would have to, because what do we say in the Mishnah? We said, oh, they sleep in their own houses. We said sleep in their own houses. Okay, then they have to go ahead if the Eruv is somewhere else. Then they have to join the Eruv. But it sounds like if they slept in their father's house, the father made in the basement the extra 3 rooms to have Reuben, Shimon, Levi all sleeping in his house, then they wouldn't have to. Now, so therefore that seems to refute Rav, because the Gemara is going to quote at the end that Rav says that Malkam Pita Gurm, where you eat is the cause, and we have over here that they're eating their father's household, but since they sleep somewhere else, we consider them as distinct. So you see, similarly, not like Rav, we see that where you sleep is the cause. Which Rabbi says no makabli prashan. We're talking about where people, they take takeout from their father's household. They don't even eat by the table. So therefore, that's why even according to Rabbi holds that where you eat is the cause, they're not even eating over there. Now Taisus says, wait a second, if they don't sleep in their father's household, they don't eat in their father's household, so then how's it going to be effective by the fact that the Eruv comes to their father's house and there's no other dwellers, that they don't have to join the Eruv? So Taisus says, since they menemt from the tata, those titmen, menemt from the tata, this is genig, that it's going to be considered as they all live over there by their father, and therefore they wouldn't have to go ahead and make a separate Eruv. But if they're making Eruv somewhere else, then since they take cash and carry, and they don't sleep over there, so therefore that's why they would have to go ahead and join. As the Gemara concludes this by showing what this discussion is, if someone has a gatehouse, or a chsadro, merpesa, these are two types of like porches. One is from the first floor, one's like the second floor. But he has this in his friend's courtyard, so he has ownership. He owns something in his friend's courtyard, but it's something that's like a gatehouse. It's something that's not somewhere where you actually live. And so it's not like making him a resident of the chutzner. It's not going to make it forbidden on his friend, because you don't have anything that you're not joining the area. But let's say based on Tevin, let's say you have a house of storage for the straw, or based on bakar, or you have a barn, or based on eitzim where wood is kept, or based on eitzes, or a storage house. Then, since you have a house, so to speak, over there, that which you store something significant, and you're not part of the Eruv, you're going to make it forbidden on his friend to carry in his own chutzner. Now, Yehuda, he disagrees. He says no. The only thing that makes it problematic if you're not joining the Eruv and you have rights in someone else's house in his courtyard is you have a place of dwelling. And Rabbi Yehuda proves it. Says he had 5 different rights of courtyards in Usha. And the story came in front of the sage, and they said, the only problematic elements are going to be if you have a place of dwelling, but just having a base on Tev and a base on Bakar, a barn or whatever, that's not going to make it forbidden. Now, says the Gemara in explanation of Rabbi Yehuda, base the Rasoket, do you really think to say it's a place of dwelling? Because that sounds like even if it would be like some other insignificant, like a barn or something like that. Rather say no makam, they're a place of dwelling. which my makom dira, what does it mean, a place of dwelling? This is the machlekes we had referred to before. Rambam, he says, Gimel is makom pita. It's a place of bread where the person eats. Shmuel says it's makom lina. It's a place where a person sleeps, and not like a beis hatevin, not like a barn or something like that, where a person doesn't do either one of them. That's the view that disagrees with the Tanna Kama. But again, that's what we mentioned before. We have a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. What is the kaveh? What defines where a person is living to make it asaf at Ruba Chatzeris? Is where he eats or where he sleeps, and that's where the halacha of the Mishnah was relevant to say that regarding the brothers. It sounded like not like Rav. It sounded like where a person sleeps, and we said no. It's not only that they don't sleep by their father's house, they don't even eat, but again, they take from the father, and therefore, and if the heir comes to the father's household or there's no other dwellers, then they would not have to make a separate Ruba Chatzeris. Something to discuss in today's Daf and Eruvin Daf Ayin Beis was that we had the machlekes in the previous daf between Remeir and the Rabbanim. Do we rely on the shituf to take the place of an Eruv? The Chacham said you have to make both. The Chacham said you could do either one of them, and the Remeir says no, you could either do one or the other. So we had the machlekes Amiram. Is the machlekes specifically by wine? But if it's made out of bread, everyone would agree that one would be sufficient. Of course, it's bread. Bread, you're anyway doing Ruba Chatzeris bread, so that should be enough. Or no, the second interpretation was that no, to the contrary, by wine, everyone agrees that you have to have two. Because of wine, how could you rely on the shittim boys of wine if wine doesn't work for Chatzeris? Machlekes was regarding bread. That still the Chacham said, yes, the Chacham said, yeah, one's enough because it's the same bread. And Rameh says, no, even in that case, no, bread's not, and that was the mandama that we had said in the previous daf, that was for Rabbi Yosef, in case you recall, that was saying that Rameh has two stringencies, not only by wine, but even by bread, he holds that you cannot rely on the shittim advice. Now, so based on that interpretation, this is the Chacham said, oy ma'arvin, oy mishtatvin, that we said that must be mishtatvin bepas, because if you mishtatv b'yayin, now we said, according to that interpretation, the Chacham would agree that it wouldn't be effective, so it must have been oy mishtatvin bepas. Then we said halacha is like Remeir, or the minig, or the nagul, like we said, halacha is you lecture about it, minig is that you tell someone in private, and nagul is if he did it after the fact, you don't make him go backwards like Remeir, that you need both, shaddukim advice and Ruba Chatzeris. Then we went to the next mission. We said if you have 5 groups in one mansion, Beisham says each chabura, each group that's in a separate room that has a separate opening into the chatzir needs to make a join into the area. Beisil says no, one area is enough for them all. Now, but Mishnah said Beisil agrees by chadar and ba'aliyas, which we explained the Gemara what that actually means. So we had a 4-way machlekes regarding how did it qualify this machlekes Beisham Beisil. The first interpretation of Rav Nachman, called the Lishna Kama, said the machlekes is by mesipas, by these flimsy little walls. But if let's say it was bona fide mechitzas, you bring in these good mechitzas that are 10 tefachim high, everyone would agree that every room is considered separate, and you would have to make a separate erev for every chabur. That was one interpretation. Second interpretation of Rav Nachman, which we call the Lishna Basra, the second version, says that no, even by mesipas is the machlekes, which that infers that the machlekes is even when the mechitzas is 10 tefachim high. That still Beisil holds that no, even if it's mechitzas 10 tefachim high, you're not going to require a separate air from every single room. B'Shamay requires by both mechitzas and mesipas to have a separate air from each and every room. Then we had 2 different opinions of Chir and Shimon, and we didn't know which one says what. But the third version, the third interpretation says machlekes is by mechitzas that reach the ceiling. That's where machlekes b'Shamay is so. But if it doesn't reach the ceiling, everyone agree that, yeah, it's enough to have one air because it's not considered separate rooms. The walls don't even go up. How can we be considered separate rooms? I could peek over the wall. I see you over there. Fourth opinion says, no, machlekes is when it doesn't reach. That's when machlekes. But if it reaches, then it's separate. The mechitzas go up. It's separate rooms. Even still would agree that you have to make an air for every single chabur would have to join into the air. Then we asked from a brayso. Rabbi Saba says that the machlekes was not when the walls reach the ceiling. Everyone agrees if it reaches the ceiling, then it's separate rooms, and you need to make an air for every chabur. And the Gemara says the mesnita is also daika because that was what we mean chadar and ba'aliyas. We don't have to tell you rooms and lofts. Of course, they're separate. It's ke'ein chadar, but ke'ein aliyas. That even if it's similar, which is like this, which you have the walls going up to the top, that's like separate rooms, even though it really was one big room. That yes, Beisil would agree, as the Mishnah says he agrees in that case, that then you have to make an air for every single group. The machlekes was when the walls do not reach to the top. So then that's when Beisil says, okay, since the walls don't reach the top, we consider all one big room and only have to do one bread from this whole mansion. Bisham says no, we consider separate. Every single group has to give their own air. Based on that, the 4 interpretations go like this. The third interpretation is refuted. Why is the third interpretation refuted? Because the third interpretation said clearly the machlokes is only when the walls reach the top, but if it doesn't, it's going to be one erev. What do you mean? We see clearly from Rabbi Saber that the machlokes is only when it doesn't reach, but if it does reach, there is no machlokes. So that's clearly the third interpretation refuted. The fourth interpretation is supported because it's exactly what the fourth interpretation said. Machlokes is when it doesn't reach, but if it reaches, everyone agrees that you have to make a separate erev for every single chabur. So that's exactly the fourth interpretation. The first interpretation is also refuted. The first version of Nachman said that the machlokes has only been mesipus. But if it's a mechitza of 10 tefachim, everyone agrees you have to make an erev for every single chabur. That's not like Rabbi Saber. Rabbi Saber said, no, Beis Hillel holds even if you have mechitza of 10 tefachim. If it doesn't reach the ceiling, then it's still enough with one erev from the mold. So that's a clear refutation of the first interpretation of Rav Nachman. The question was regarding the second interpretation of Rav Nachman. The question is because the second interpretation says that Beis Shammai disagrees even by mesipus. It sounds like from Rabbi Saber that the machlokes is only regarding mechitzas that don't reach the ceiling. But if it's not mechitzas that even mesipus, that Beis Shammai would agree that then it would be enough with erev echel kulan. On that said the Gemara, no. Rav Nachman, according to that second version, would tell you that no, they actually disagree even by not only mechitza but also by mesipus. Beis Shammai would still say over there that you have to take an erev for every single chabur. So why do we say it only by mechitza? It sounds like mesipus you agree. No, because we want to tell you the koyach of Beis Hillel, because koyach der teir is adif, that even Beis Hillel, even by mechitza, doesn't reach the ceiling, it's still going to be erev echel kulam. But Beis Shammai, yeah, he holds even if you do mesipus, you still have to go ahead and make a separate erev from every single chabur. Then we had another qualification in regards to this machlokes Beis Shammai, which we have two different versions. When did we say in this machlokes Beis Shammai, let's say that Beis Shammai says it's going to be forbidden, meaning that every single chabur has to make his own erev, is to taking the erev to another place. But if let's say the erev is coming to their mansion, then everyone would agree that it's enough that they could all join with one piece of bread, meaning that they don't have to make separate eruvin. And then it comes out that the brayso that says when you have 5 people that collected their erev and they bring it to another place that's sufficient to make one erev for them all, that's like Beis Hillel. Because Beis Shammai, we said the machlokes is when you bring it somewhere else. Beis Shammai says that everyone has to bring their own. Beis Hillel says no, one has to bring it for them all. But when it's coming to them, Beis Shammai would agree that we're all considered as one, and then they wouldn't have to join more than the one. They wouldn't have to each bring their own piece of bread. That was one version. The other version said the opposite. No, when did we say this machlokes Beis Shammai is when the erev is coming to them? That's when you have machlokes Beis Shammai. Do they each have to make their own erev, or are they considered that they're all the host? But if it's going somewhere else, then actually everyone, even Beis Hillel, would agree that yes, every single chabur has to give. And we said based on that, the brayso that says that when Chamisha Shugam and Eruvin, they're bringing to another chatzar, only one bread has to go. That's not like Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, because according to that interpretation, Beis Hillel holds that you have to go ahead and each one bring their own. Then we went to the next initiative, so we have brothers that are eating on their father's table, but they sleep in their own house. That we said that it's enough that they have to go ahead and make an erev for every single one, as the Mishnah had explained. That's when they're taking the erev to another one of the houses. But if let's say it's coming to them, or if let's say there's no one else that lives in the chutzner, then you don't have to go and make an erev. They're all considered part of the patriarch of the family, and then it's enough to go ahead and not make an erev. Now we said, although it says the criterion seems to be they're sleeping in their house, that's not a proof, not like Rav, that it's where you sleep that's the cause, because as the Gemara ultimately explains, Makabe Pras, where they don't even eat in their father's household. They take the food to take out, so therefore they're eating in their home. So not only is Makam Lina not in their father's household, but even Makam Pete is not by the father's household. Therefore, if the erev is going somewhere else, or if there's other dwellers and they're going somewhere else, and that's when we say that they have to each join in the erev. But if let's say it's coming to their father's household, or if there's no other dwellers, then we said that then they don't have to go ahead and make an erev, because they're still part, like they said, they're still part of the father's household, because ultimately that's where, from the mama's koch, sikim, so that's genig, that's still considered as part of their father's household. Thank you to any time for hosting us.